I'm Sam Roberts of the New York Times, and welcome to a new year of the New York Times Close Up. On this program, we continue to feature leading newsmakers and the New York Times journalists who cover them. This week, I'll talk with sometime guest host and Metro Desk reporter Jeffery Mays. Jeffery covers City Hall and local politics, and suffice it to say, we have got some catching up to do on Mayor Eric Adams. But first, the road to the White House. It officially begins next week as the Iowa caucuses kick off the Republican nomination. Joining us, New York Times political correspondent Michael Bender. He's in Iowa. His best-selling book, Frankly, We Did Win This Election, the inside story of how Trump lost, focused on the political dynamics surrounding Trump's 2020 election campaign. Michael, as we said, you're in Des Moines, Iowa now. What does the campaign there look like? We keep running stories about the dire predictions by some people of what Trump may do in his second term. We heard from Chris Christie bowing out of the campaign this past week of what fears there are about a Trump second term. Are Iowans expressing any of those concerns themselves?
Yeah, I mean it's a really interesting race out here, as you mentioned. The big news so far has been Chris Christie dropping out. He wasn't expected to have much of an impact in Iowa, but it's certainly going to stand as one of the significant moments in this primary race. I've been out in Des Moines and Iowa watching the candidates and talking to voters for a few days now, and really they are interested in sending a message to Washington and to the rest of the country. It's all the polls show that Donald Trump has a very healthy lead here in Iowa, as he does in most states. So a lot of the conversation has turned toward who's going to come in second between Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis, and whether they can produce a strong enough second place showing to give themselves some momentum heading into New Hampshire in a couple of weeks. And then South Carolina next month. Voters are very. It feels like the stakes are very high here. Voters are talking about the soul of the country at stake, the soul of the party, and in very Iowan fashion, a lot of the folks I talk to who are going to these campaign events say they still haven't decided. They're deciding between DeSantis and Trump, or they're deciding between Vivek Ramaswamy and Trump. And obviously Nikki Haley is trying to get her campaign kickstarted right here in Iowa too.
Michael, they're voting as caucuses in Iowa, not a normal primary. Right. Could you explain to us how representative is that of rank and file Republicans in Iowa?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of different ways you can look at it. I mean, on the whole, it's usually a very small percentage of either party that participates in a caucus. A caucus is something like a primary night, but instead of going to a ballot box and casting your vote, you go to essentially a community meeting. And the shorthand here is you kind of hash it out with your neighbors over who you're going to support. So it takes quite a commitment to participate in a caucus. And as we know already, the primary elections usually don't get a huge turnout. Caucuses get it even less. So on one hand, you can look at this and say it's not very representative of the party. On the other hand, to be motivated to go and participate in a caucus, you have to feel pretty passionately about the party and the race and the issues facing your town or state or in country. So in that sense, it is very representative of the activist wings of the party, which usually fuel the direction politically and policy-wise for Republicans and Democrats.
Chris Christie dropping out may help one of the people coming in second. How important is coming in second going to be in the New Hampshire primary? Coming in second in Iowa.
How important is coming in second in Iowa?
Yeah.
It depends on, from which camp you're coming from. I mean, but it's going to be very important for anyone. I mean, DeSantis absolutely. Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, absolutely needs to come in the second. He's his campaign is blown through a lot of money. Right here in Iowa, he's essentially put all of his eggs in this basket here, campaigning as a staunch conservative, anti-abortion, trying to get the evangelical vote here, peel it away from Trump and to him and toward him. If he's unable to succeed in even beating Nikki Haley here, we would expect there will be a lot of stories the next day on when is Ron DeSantis going to drop out. Nikki Haley, on the other hand, has her campaign is building out from Iowa into New Hampshire, and of course, she's the former governor of South Carolina, which holds a contest in February. She really needs to come in second here to build momentum toward New Hampshire. It's hard to see a scenario in which Nikki Haley, comes in. She has to not only does she have to come in second in Iowa, but she has to come in a very, very close second in New Hampshire, potentially even win New Hampshire before going into her home state of South Carolina. She needs to consistently be building momentum, or else it could be a short race for her too.
I was going to ask you that. What is the threshold in New Hampshire that she has to reach? And is that going to have any effect? If she comes in a strong second, is that going to make a difference? Is Trump still going to be unstoppable?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, a strong second is kind of hard to define. Right now, 2 weeks before the race out there, it's sort of a you know it when you see it kind of thing. But she's got to come in. It's got to be a single digit, defeat in New Hampshire to be considered a strong second place finish. And the reason there is because she's going into South Carolina, which is her home state. It's kind of from the outside looking in, it's wild to sit here and say this race could be over after just 3 of the 50 states vote in this primary. But the reality is momentum matters. People want to back a winner, and after South Carolina is the Super Tuesday primary on March 5th, which is a dozen plus state is a half a dozen. I'm sorry, it's about 15 states. And if Nikki Haley can't win her home state in South Carolina, it's difficult to imagine what kind of pitch she can make to the Super Tuesday states about why they should support her. How is she going to win in Tennessee and Texas and Michigan, California, if she can't even win her own backyard in South Carolina?
Michael, you and your colleagues have written that so far the Trump campaign has been full of falsehoods. It has been sort of stirring up chaos. Why haven't people reacted more negatively to that? Why have people, certainly as supporters, accepted that? Why aren't Democrats more concerned about that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think Democrats are increasingly concerned about that. We wrote a couple of weeks ago that the Biden campaign wants to try to get Trump into the news more, which is kind of a wild assertion. Given their critique of the media over the last 5 years or so, that we've been giving him too much airspace. I think a lot of people aren't completely tuned in to this race yet, and not thinking about November 2024 quite yet. A and B, just coming around to the reality that this is very, very likely going to be a matchup of a 2020 contest that they weren't very excited about. This is I recall this poll we did last summer, and one of the big numbers in our polling in recent years has been to look at voters who say they dislike both candidates. Right, that number has grown as a share of the electorate. It used to be, when it was McCain and Obama in 2008, like 3 to 5% of American voters said they disliked both candidates. Now that number, since 2016, heading into 2024, now that number's around 20% of people who say they strongly dislike both candidates. And our poll last year, we looked at that 20%. and who among that 20%, about 1/5 said they weren't going to vote at all. If it was Biden and Trump, that they weren't going to vote at all. And the remarkable thing about that at the time was that not voting wasn't an option in our poll. So these people proactively told pollsters, no, if it's Biden, Trump, I'm not voting. So I sort of shudder to think what turnout is going to look like if it's Biden and Trump again. And remember, these are they're also effectively two incumbents running. America, and what I mean by that is Americans know both of these men very well at this point. And so I think there's also not just a sort of loathing about these two men as their choices, but also a realization that they already know these guys and don't need to be tuned into every little thing they're saying to make their decision. And the sort of last point I would make here is that it is still very early in the race, and the fact is Biden is the actual incumbent. And heading into a reelection, the starting point for American voters in a reelection year is a referendum on the incumbent. Mm-hmm. Do we like Biden, or do you want to give him another 4 years or not? And the sort of disappointment in Biden across the country, I think is the leading emotion from voters right now, and that Trump isn't. And the choice of Trump isn't necessarily a choice of Trump, but a referendum on Biden. So that means the big question for this next 11 months is going to be whether Biden can turn this into a choice between Trump and Biden instead of a referendum on his own performance.
Michael, a very quick last question. Trump's been impeached twice. He's been indicted, 4 times. Why is he still gaining strength?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy here. There's a lot of Republican voters who, a year ago, we look at the Republican primary polls, DeSantis was winning in some of these. There certainly was a very close race. Trump has coalesced the party. He's rallied Republicans from every corner, every sort of demographic and of the party, in part because a lot of people see him being treated unfairly. I mean, it would, some of these indictments, particularly the one in New York over the hush money payments to Stormy Daniels, people felt was particularly unfair. That was the first one, and I think that has colored the thinking so far that Trump is being treated unfairly. That they want if Trump is going to go away, if Trump is going to be pushed out of the political scene, it's going to be up to voters, not a Senate impeachment trial, not a court in New York, not a court in Washington, D.C. or Georgia.
Michael Bender of the New York Times, thank you so much for joining us. He's the author also of Frankly, We Did Win This Election, the inside story of how Trump lost. Coming up next, Mayor Adams' period of discontent. The last few months have not been going well for the mayor. He continues to struggle with the city's migrant crisis, as well as a rocky relationship with the press. In November, there was news of a sexual assault allegation, a federal investigation into his campaign fundraising. He's also been getting pushback from the city council and progressives, and now his flagging poll numbers have Democratic challengers smelling blood. Joining us to discuss the mayor's current fog of war is Metro reporter Jeffery Mays. And Jeffery, we're at the halfway point in the mayor's term. It may seem like he's been around longer, but it's only 2 years of a 4-year term. To paraphrase Ed Koch, how do you think he's doing?
Well, I think it depends on who you ask. A lot of people are concerned about the direction of the city. The city's facing some big crises right now, the migrant situation, budget situation. I recently wrote a story where some people were raising concerns about how the mayor is managing those issues. They want to see him be a little more outgoing on those issues, bringing forth more solutions. For example, with the migrant situation, he has really focused a lot of his energy on talking about Washington and that the city needs help from Washington. A lot of people here are saying that the mayor should be proposing more solutions, innovative solutions to help deal with this issue.
It seems on the budget he is talking about cuts that have to be made. He's just exempted the police department from those cuts because people obviously worried about possible increases in crime. And the migrant situation, which various experts say will cost X number of billions of dollars, everyone seems to agree the money for that should come from Washington. So what is it that he's actually doing wrong? He's working or acting, let's say, acting probably a better word, as a cheerleader for the city. What is he doing wrong as a manager of the city?
Yeah, I think, with the migrant crisis, for example, people have said there should be a movement to sort of change the city's voucher system so that we move people out of shelter more quickly so the city doesn't experience this sort of backlog of people in shelter. As I said, DC has said the money is not coming. So what is the plan from the city? I think people want to see a comprehensive plan. Also talk to people in the private and nonprofit sector who feel like their expertise is not being tapped to help the city with this difficult problem. So these are all things that you would expect the mayor of New York City to do. You have lots of resources, companies, nonprofits who have experience with dealing with this. A lot of them are saying that they are not being used in the way that they would hope to help with this difficult situation.
He's gotten some criticism about the police being too tough. But isn't that, or is that, a reason that crime has been going down?
Well, the mayor ran on the idea that he would be able to reduce crime. He's a former police officer, as you know, and that's really what he led with during the campaign. If you look at the numbers from last year, overall crime was down very slightly. We've seen drops in murders and shootings as well, but nationwide, we've also seen a drop in crime. So the mayor has led with that. He's talked about how, jobs are up and crime is down. Towards the end of the year, he sort of made a push to let voters, let residents know that he feels like he's accomplishing the things that he said he was going to accomplish. However, that hasn't been enough for a lot of people. There's a lot of concern about housing, for example, housing production, dealing with bus lanes and other sort of initiatives that the city wants to see. I spoke to one advocate who, is an ally of the mayor, basically said she wanted to see one big idea from the mayor in the way that Bill de Blasio used universal pre-kindergarten as his one big idea to sort of make big changes in the city.
What would that one big idea be? When people say, okay, let's have a big idea from the mayor, what would they suggest?
Well, I think that's difficult. That's for the mayor to decide, right? He's talked about crime, but crime is something that every mayor deals with, and keeping crime down. I think people want to see more innovation from him, and I think there have been concerns about how certain issues have been handled. For example, budget cuts. He just revised his budget cut numbers. He revised how much the migrant situation would cost. People want better numbers. They want better action. You have better numbers, you can make decisions. You don't have to close libraries on Saturdays, for example.
How much can a mayor do about housing? Everyone talks about affordable housing. Affordable, of course, a very subjective term. What can a mayor do to get more housing? Don't we need help from the state and from Washington too?
Absolutely. I think one of the things that the mayor has been praised about is this sort of proposal to change the zoning and text amendments in the city to allow more housing to be built quickly. Governor Hochul tried to introduce a housing plan last year that really got a lot of pushback. And that's what you see in New York. You see a lot of people resisting sort of housing, especially affordable housing, which is what is actually needed. So I think the mayor said he was excited about what he heard from Governor Hochul. He's definitely calling on her to help push his plan to provide more housing. And the mayor has been very vocal that the city is not building enough housing, and that is really the root of the problem. So I think the zoning amendments, the changes, that's what people want to see from this administration, a vision to help provide a way to actually build more affordable housing.
How do we reconcile the fact that so many people who demand or call for or prefer more affordable housing are opposed to more density?
That's the issue the mayor is saying. He's pushed a plan to build affordable housing in pricier neighborhoods. His point has been that the entire city has to share in this. You can't call for more housing and then restrict where that housing is built. And I think that's one of the things, that's one of the issues. He calls it a city of yes, where the city says yes to more housing, more construction. That's one of the things that a lot of people have praised him on. Even the city council, which he's had sort of contentious relationship with, is sort of looking forward to working with him on that idea of changing the city zoning so that more housing can be built.
How are his relations with the city council compared to previous mayors?
I think they've been a little difficult. This council, I would say, is probably one of the most progressive councils that we've had. You have, at least 8 or 10 people who consider themselves democratic socialists on there. They've pushed back on the mayor on a number of issues, especially policing, and then his budget cuts as well, cutting certain services that they say are necessary in the city. He's had a difficult time with his low poll numbers, which are some of the lowest since Quinnipiac started polling mayors, and then sort of his resistance to some of their ideas. He's had a rough time with the council. I think they feel like they have the leverage right now, given his poll numbers, given that he's under federal investigation at this point. And I expect them to make a push to push a lot of their progressive agenda.
What happened to that federal investigation? We haven't heard much about it the past couple of weeks or even months.
It's still ongoing, as far as we know. Of course, the mayor has yet to be accused of any wrongdoing specifically, but we know that his phones were seized by the FBI and that the home of his chief fundraiser was raided as well. So it's very serious. We have to wait and see what happens. Mayor Adams has said that he has done nothing wrong and that he is cooperating. We have to see what the prosecutor comes up with.
And have we figured out what his relationship with Turkey is, and has the city benefited from it at all?
Well, it's complicated. He was borough president of Brooklyn. He says his goal was to make sister city relationships with Turkey. He went a number of times, at least twice, to Turkey. It appears to have caused some problems that the U.S. Attorney is looking into. And I still think we have to wait and see what actually is revealed at this point.
Jeffrey, his poll numbers are low, but it's only halfway through his term. He's an incumbent, very hard to beat an incumbent. If people are smelling blood, it means a bunch of them will be going against him in the Democratic primary, dividing the opposition. Doesn't that mean his chances of re-election at this point are still pretty good?
I would argue that, yes, I think he still has a strong chance at re-election. He's done a very good job of talking to his base, who are supportive of him still, in spite of the sort of low overall poll numbers. You still see support among his base. And in the city, you need a base in order to win an election.
And what is that base?
I would say that base is sort of middle class, Black, Latino, homeowners, people who work for the city, people in the outer boroughs. Certainly, he's not looking to Park Slope or certain parts of Manhattan for support. He won election without those places. He's done a lot to try to cater to that base, and I think he still gets support from them.
When he talks about opposition, how much does he think that's based on race?
The mayor has made it clear that he feels like he's treated differently because of his race. Interestingly, he joined a sort of coalition with other black mayors from Chicago, Houston at the time, and talked about the ways in which it's difficult. It's a difficult job to begin with. He feels that sometimes he's judged differently because of his race. He has not been afraid to say that, and I think that's part of the reason that his base continues to support him and give him a lot of leeway.
Jeffrey Mays of the New York Times, thank you so much for joining us. And coming up next, I'll share some personal thoughts on a former mayor. It was a poignant moment for me as a young reporter. On December 31st, 1973, at dusk, John Lindsay extinguished the brass library lamp on his desk and left City Hall for the last time as mayor of New York. 8 years earlier, he was elected because, as Murray Kempton wrote, he was fresh and everyone else was tired. Now, after 2 feverish terms as mayor, everyone was tired. But the Young Turks, they were still young, whom Lindsay had lured into government, was struck by an irony as they turned City Hall over to the graybeards of the Beam administration. The torch, Lindsay's chief of staff, Steve Eisenberg, mused, has been passed to a new generation. Lindsay alumni gathered last week to commemorate the 50th anniversary of those final days. They looked grayer, of course, but they also personified a great legacy of the Lindsay administration, the talent he lured into government. In the 1965 mayoral campaign, William F. Buckley accused Lindsay of flamboyant idealism. It was a badge that the energetic newcomers to City Hall wore proudly. Sure, they could have used more adult supervision. They often blamed the federal government for many urban problems and passed the buck to Washington for solutions. Self-inflicted divisions over school decentralization, a low-income housing project in a middle-class neighborhood, and even over snow removal reflected profound rifts that endure today. But as Jeff Greenfield, who was Lindsay's speechwriter, once said, when we ask Sir Lancelot to feed the horses and do the washing, the armor tends to tarnish. After the reunion, Peter Goldmark, another former mayoral chief of staff, sent this letter to Lindsay's family and friends. Quote, as we talked and reflected against the background of the turbulent present our country is experiencing, we were struck by how many important and constructive initiatives that had wide national impact the Lindsay years triggered. Goldmark continued, what a powerful and gifted generation of public servants and innovators Lindsay catalyzed and supported, and how critical the Lindsay administration was in defining and accelerating our country's move toward greater fairness and opportunity for its most vulnerable citizens. We measure a mayor's legacy on what he inherited, what he accomplished, and what he left for his successor. 2 out of 3 isn't so bad. For the New York Times and CUNY TV, I'm Sam Roberts.